Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Major League Balatro weekly recap. I'm your host, Phantom, and with me is our other host, Sizak.
Hello.
We'll skip the introductions this time. If you want to hear those, go ahead and watch last week's episodes where we do it. So we'll get right into the wheel spins. If you weren't aware, every single week, the very first game is a randomly chosen deck and stake. We will start with a stake spin. You can see we've removed the black stake, which is what we played on last week. So it'll be one of the other stakes.
Please no. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back to white stake, everybody.
We thought we were gonna remove both the last two stakes, but then it turned out we're leaving white stake on there, and
we're going back to it, everybody. All right. We have removed both of the last two decks, so there's no red deck and there's no anaglyph deck. Those were the last 2 weeks, so let's see what we end up
so
on.
bad if it's something boring like blue or yellow, like just plain basic.
Plasma's kind of hype.
Oh, okay. I'm so down with plasma.
Okay, Plasma White will be your game one for week 3.
Nice. Okay, you know what? If it had to be white stake, plasma white just works together. I am so down for that.
And we're going to follow a similar format to last time, where we'll talk about the matches that went on, the game of the week, as well as the standings and a preview of the next week. But before we get into that, we want to talk a little bit about what we saw with these random deck stakes for this past week, because the one that we had last week was Anaglyph Black Stake. So Sizak, what are your thoughts on the Anaglyph Black Stake? What did you see from your division?
I feel like there was a lot of really interesting skips taken, because on Anaglyph, in multiplayer, you often just think of going for the rare skips, maybe rarely like a spectral skip or some of the econ skips people will take sometimes. But here we saw not only those, but there was a lot of interesting skips. Like there were several Arcana skips that ended up turning out really well for players, and just a lot of interesting choices in when to take them and money skips that you might not expect, like a time to take them. Just, I don't know. It was really interesting to see the points that players took different skips and the ways that it affected the games.
I think for myself as well, there was a lot more skips than I'm typically used to seeing. And I think especially in the Major League rule set, you were able to see how that skip can affect the game so much. Because there's no order in the Major League rule set, whenever you skip, you're missing out on shops that you're never going to see again. And so a lot of times, the skips worked out and they got something valuable out of it. A lot of times the skips didn't work out and they missed out on something that was really strong or potentially game winning for the other person. So I think that's just very interesting decisions for Anaglyph. And so the fact that everyone had to play on that was pretty entertaining for everyone this week. Okay, with that in mind, we're going to start with Game of the Week. The Game of the Week for this week was Game 1 of Balanos Bear versus Fur. So Sizak, I'll let you start talking about it, and I'll give my thoughts as well.
First game, Bear versus Fur. It started out pretty straightforward. We're on the black Anaglyph, because that's the first game for all of them. Started out pretty straightforward. Fur ended up being behind on glass early, ended up going down all the way to 1-3, but Fur ended up having more econ and was able to get ahead in the shop and found a Dusk. Along with the Dusk, Fur took this Arcana skip that gave Death and Justice. I believe it was 4 separate times that literally in the pack there was Death and Justice. I think there was also like another Justice in one of the packs. Out of like 5 or 6 Jumbo Arcanas, or I guess they're Mega Arcanas opened, there were 4 sets of Death Justice that Bear found from that one skip. Yeah, and that just, totally caught him up on glass.
Counted it up after he left that, all those skips, all those tags, he ends up with 10 glass, which is actually more glass than Bear had, who had spent the entire game building into the glass.
Yeah, that is insane. That is insane.
Down on 1 life too, right before PvP. Like he needed something and got exactly what he needed.
Yeah, and then the rest of the game remained pretty good. Bear, so even though Bear was no longer ahead on glass, he still, I believe, all the way up until the end of the game, had more red seal glass, but Fur was able to get it down to 1-1 with just having more glass in general. Bear did end up making more of those red seal glass before the last PvP. Also, interesting to note, right before that last PvP, in the shop, Fur did find a brainstorm that it looked like Bear was maybe not going to find, but kind of last minute, he barely rolled deep enough to find that brainstorm. So most players had this brainstorm. In the final PvP, Bear was kind of favored to win because he has more of the red seal glass. I believe the jokers were... Bear had something to compensate for the fact that Fur had the Dusk.
Dusk came back.
Right, okay, so Dusk came back.
So Fur had the Dusk early.
Was happening that earlier. Yeah, right. And then, so Bear was favored to win this with more red seal glass. Bear rolls down, discards down, gets down to, he's got 4 red seal glass in hand, 7 cards in the deck, and 2 hands left. So he's also got a red steel in deck that he would like to have for more points. He doesn't know how much Fur has. He decides to take a very greedy line, I would say, of trying to dig as deep as possible, hoping he hits both those red seal glass and the red seal steel by playing 5 cards, including one of the red seal glass, hoping to just draw both of them and the red seal steel back. So basically, in the bottom 7 cards of the deck, he needed to make sure that none of those 3 cards were in the bottom 2. Unfortunately, with that greedy draw, one of the red seal glass was in the bottom 2, and only having a 4 of a kind there ended up making the difference, and Fur barely took that game.
Crazy game. Would recommend watching it if you haven't already. Something that I think was interesting was early, Bear takes an investment skip, and then also skips for a speed tag to get more econ. So they actually had a lot less of the skips from Anaglyph deck in the later antes. Whereas Fur, he saved up all of his double tags and was able to get, all those charm tags, and that literally saved him in the end.
Yeah, I feel like that's the way to do it on Anaglyph. Like,
Mhm.
you don't want to take a bunch of different skips. You want to really save them up and do one really big skip. Because skips obviously cost you, and they become more worth it, but it's a lot more worth it when you only have to take one and it gets a ton of value.
Mm-hmm. And I also think it's interesting that despite Bear taking 2 different skips for econ, that Fur was still ahead on econ.
I believe that was like lucky cards was mainly the reason for that, which is
Mhm.
also interesting to note. There were 2 very large lucky cats. Fur's was the biggest at 12 times at the end of the game, so that was
huge lucky
amazing.
cat. it kind of made it hard for him to farm money from the luckies because he kept winning too fast with the big lucky cat.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but he still was able to get it huge and make a lot of money, so it worked out for him. Well, that was game 1. That was our game of the week. Let's continue talking about that set, finish out the set, and then we'll talk about the rest of them.
So the second game for Baron Fur was on Gold State Ghost deck. Fur won the game mainly because there was a perishable rental Chad that he didn't take, and then a clean one showed up later, so he continued to have the Chad, and it didn't cost him money throughout the game, and that pretty much was the main reason he took the win on that one. Game 3, Fur was up 2-0, but Belanos did not let him get the full shutout with the 3-0. Bear takes the final game on a black checkered deck with blue seal flush levels and just holding more X-Molt gave him an advantage to let him go up 4-2 early on. And then when it turned into an idle game, Bear just had, more time and more resources with more glass and those flush levels, even though they weren't a lot of times really perfect idle hands, just playing flushes with like 3 idle cards or so, and was able to take the win that way in that set.
Nice.
Well, in that game, not the set, but
Yeah. So Fur wins that set 2-1. And then we will go right back to the top to our first game of the week, which was Zeno versus Scooty.
So first game, Zeno versus Scooty. Again, Black Anaglyph as usual. Zeno won because he was up red seals, was part of it, but also there was this moment where Scooty opened up this pack. We saw Scooty open it first, and there was an eternal trading card. Later, Scooty rolls down farther, finds another trading card, a clean one, and takes it. Well, Zeno happened to open that pack when the trading card was in the shop, so the trading card in the pack ended up blocking into an eternal dusk. So Zeno ends up with a dusk that Scooty doesn't have, and that seals the deal along with the red seals, gives him the win there. Game 2 was on checkered gold stake, and Zeno early on took a hack that Scooty didn't take, and then took an Eternal Odd Todd, which is a Joker that is strong, but you might hesitate to take a little bit at Eternal. But it ended up being enough, and the seed wasn't super strong, and it just gave a ton of chips along with everything else, and Zeno takes the win on that one as well. The final game of the set was on White Erratic. Scooty skipped the first Buffoon pack, and this is something that's going to come up in like several of the games this week. Folks, always open the first Buffoon pack. It is just there's almost never a situation where you don't open it. Scooty skips the first Buffoon pack. There was a photo in it, and Zeno ended up taking the lead that way. Also, notably, later, Scooty found a mime and held it for a bit, but Scooty sold it in the shop right before finding a Baron. And, still tried to go Baron, decided to go back to the high card build after selling out of mime, but it just wasn't enough to keep up with what Zeno had with Photo Chad.
Now we'll go to the next game, which is Edsy versus Feinberg. Game 1, as always, was on Anaglyph deck Blackstake. The very beginning, pretty interesting. Both players open an Arcana pack, and there's the soul in it. They both rip it. It's a Canio. Edzy sells the Canio for a mime, Feinberg keeps the Canio. Basically what happens in this game is Edzy builds into that high card build, with that mime, builds Red Steel Kings, Baron never comes. Feinberg builds into that glass, some of the glass even breaks, building up that Canio. Photo Chad, Fine actually gets an uncommon block into a sock, and ends up taking the game 4-0. Game 2, back to Black Stake, but on erratic deck this time. I think the biggest difference in this game was Edzy. Very early, he took a trio that Feinberg passed up in place of a Bootstraps. And the trio was a lot stronger for Edzy to be able to both make it out of the blinds, keep up that econ lead, as well as being able to have that high scoring to win the PvPs. And this one as well, Edzy will win 4-0 without that consistent scoring of the trio. Feinberg actually loses 2 lives to blinds. He isn't able to find enough scoring to be able to survive as strong as Edzy is with that trio. Game 3, winner takes all. It's on Zodiac deck, purple stake. Very interesting early. Edzy rerolls down before the first PvP, and he finds an Eternal Chad that Feinberg does not find. It's a very dry seed early, and they both are just playing pairs. We're playing this high stakes gaming, and then we find a Dusk. Feinberg, same thing they did last week. He skips the Dusk again, but he has parking and dice. He gets more econ to be able to find Sock and Photo that Edzy is not able to find. Sock comes back for Edzy in the next ante. Edzy's down 3-1. Both of them find the idol. And then Feinberg still is up the photo, even though we have idle Sock. We still are up the photograph, so it's enough. And Feinberg takes that set 2-1, winning that third game. Next game we're going to talk about is Malf versus Sizak.
Yeah, so in this set, first game of the set, there was an early rare skip that gave Ancient Joker to each of us. The game kind of ended up centering around that, despite the fact that other than that, the seed was like extraordinarily dry. There was just no econ or anything for a long time, not even any retriggers really. I early on took a little bit of an econ lead with holding for interest, and then I also got some luckies more and sooner than Malf did, and those ended up getting a few plus 20 hits early that really gave me that econ boost. I also built up my flush levels with some blue seals, and that lead ended up giving me the game, even though at the very end, Malf did take a rare skip that I didn't take, and it's Anaglyph, so there was a few more, several rare jokers in there, and he even found a blueprint. But my flush levels, and I think a bit of glass and stuff as well, just was enough that the blueprint just didn't actually matter at that point, and I ended up taking the game 4-0. And if I hadn't taken the game there, it probably would have went quite badly later on. Game 2, we ended up on Gold Stake Nebula deck. In the first Buffoon pack, there is a Dusk and there is a Zany Joker, the one that gives plus 12 molt on 3 of a kinds. Malf ends up taking the Zany Joker over the Dusk, which I still think is a questionable move, but I understand him talking about it. It's a Gold Nebula is a very hard deck and stake combination, and he's thinking, okay, he knows I'm probably going to take the Dusk, so he wants to go the variance play and see if he can get around me, because I've got more experience in multiplayer. He wants to go with the different route, and it could have ended up winning, because I did end up losing 2 lives to blind as the game went on, but I was able to stabilize in time, and because a Bloodstone shows up, I was able to pull ahead especially well with the Dusk, and, honestly, who knows, maybe Malf's move was right, and I just got bailed out by the Bloodstone. It's hard to say. If the seed was, stronger in other ways, the Dusk still could have worked out. I still stand by my Dusk choice, but interesting and totally valid choice for Malf there. Third game was on Ghost Deck Gold Stake. So that Hex, I didn't sell it for interest in the first blind, because I'm not a huge believer in that, but I did sell it after that because I wasn't, getting much in the shop. I wanted a little bit more interest, and the only Joker I had was a perishable 8 ball, so I'm like, okay, I'm not using this Hex anytime soon. Malf actually used the Hex on the perishable 8 ball, and that was actually the better move, because that ended up being the better econ play. Getting out sooner when I was struggling to get out, I eventually ended up needing to sell that perishable 8 ball a little bit early to pick up a Saturn just to live, because it was a very rough seed. Malf kept it a little bit longer and was able to get some luckies from it, and that gave him the econ advantage, as well as winning him at least 1 PvP from lucky hits, and that ended up giving Malf the game there. So Malf took that one, I won the set 2-1. And then the next game of the week was Bear versus Fur. We already talked about that one as a game of the week. And then after that, it was Rarran versus Halion. This one was hilarious to watch, because, even listening to the commentators, every once in a while we'll unmute the players and hear what they're saying for a bit. the banter between Rarran and Haley is hilarious. They're like borderline flirting with each other at times, talking about things completely unrelated to the game with all sorts of like puns and jokes and avoiding questions about the game and stuff. It was interesting to listen to. So the first game, there was a photo in the first shop. Halion takes the photo as one does, for the most part. But I've been talking about how the early buffoon pack is so important. Rarran actually opens this early buffoon pack, which I actually in this situation probably wouldn't have done. There's a golden joker in there, but like it's kind of valid because if it's something that's not better than a photo, you can just sell it and pick up the photo. Rarran takes the golden joker and sticks with it instead of the photo, which is a bold move, but not necessarily a wrong one. And it does end up leading to an econ lead, and Rarran does end up taking that game. There was also a couple PvPs in that game where it got incredibly close. There's one that Rarran won by 30 chips, and so both very close PvPs went to Rarran. A little bit of extra luck there, giving him the win there. But definitely the Golden Joker actually ended up paying off and actually ended up being a huge econ lead that was a good thing for him and won him that game.
I would say that it's definitely a play to open up that buffoon pack. I'm not sure I would open it up either. The only real thing to consider there is because you're on black stake, you could have two Eternals, and then you both, don't get something good like a Golden Joker, and you don't get the photograph, so then you're double screwed.
Right, yeah, definitely a possibility there for sure. So the second game was on Ghost Deck White Stake. Very early, I believe it was the first shop. There was a blueprint, and they used their hex on it, and both players found an Ankh. So both players had double polychrome blueprints. Later on, as the game progressed, there was an idol, it turned into an idol game. Halion was a little bit behind and skipped like several times for the idol, two different double skips and two different antes. And that kind of econ disadvantage, Rarran was just able to find a lot of things that Halion wasn't because of that. And that led to Halion being behind and Rarran taking that one. In game 3, we were once again on White Ghost, and we once again ended up with double polychrome blueprints. Rarran ended up going up 4-1. The double polychrome blueprint didn't happen as early on this one. It was partway through the game. Rarran took it at a time where he didn't really have much else to pick up after using the Ankh, and unfortunately, all he got after it was an obelisk for a while. That led to him losing the momentum and ended up being pretty close in the last PvP. But at that point, Halion just had more glass, more jokers to work with. And the obelisk, despite getting up to 7.2 times, was not enough to compete with what Halion had. And Halion ended up taking that one. So Rarran went ahead and took that set 2-1. And then I think next we've got Nito versus Gothic.
This game, again, game 1, Anaglyph, Black Stake. Pretty interesting divergence early. Nito skips a Spectral Pack Anti 1, and that gives Gothic a red seal. That's the only red seal in the seed for a very long time. And this allows him to be able to get ahead on that deck fixing. Another case of interesting divergence was Nito actually skipped a Jumbo Buffoon with like $40 left. And in that Jumbo Buffoon, Gothic gets an Ancient Joker that Nito never finds. They both have Bloodstone, but Gothic is able to have Ancient and Bloodstone. And so that's a massive scoring advantage for Gothic. So open your Buffoon packs, kids. This is the message of this week. Open your buffoon packs.
Yep. Open your buffoon packs. Always. I mean, maybe not always, but in like 95% of scenarios, at least.
Mm-hmm. And then later in that same seed, Gothic, he skips for Ancient on Hearts because he has that Bloodstone and the Ancient. And then Nito doesn't skip for that. She doesn't have Ancient. And in that ante, there's an idol. So Nito has the idol. Gothic has the Ancient Joker. The issue is the idol wasn't hitting for Nito. Gothic, he skipped for that extra tempo with the Hearts and the Bloodstone, and he goes up 3-1, double skips on when Nito's on 1 life, and the idol still never hits for Nito. They actually ended up going for a mime build, so they were trying to go high card, they had some mimes, they're rolling into this last shop, they see Baron, and then they die to timer, and the game ends.
No! Oh my gosh, that is... that's...
So kind of a brutal end.
Me.
The commentators did the math afterward, and we believe that Gothic would have won anyway, but it is definitely a brutal way for it to end. They had gotten timered earlier, because the way it works in Major League is there's 1 instance of timer forgiveness. So if the timer runs out, you don't lose a life the very first time, but if it runs out a second time in that same game, you do lose a life, and that's what happened to Nito this time. Game 2 was on Zodiac deck Purple Stake. The biggest difference between these players was Gothic took an early 6 cents. It gives Cryptid, Deja Vu, and Wraith were 3 of the ones that it gives. Deja Vu gives him the red seal. Wraith gives Brainstorm. They both have Photo Chad, but The Brainstorm and the Deja Vu makes it a clean sweep 4-0 for Gothic Lord UK. Game 3, we went to Magic Deck White Stake. Gothic takes an Obelisk early that Nito does not take. He builds up pairs for like the entire game. He goes down to 1 life, and the Obelisk is still at 1x. He finally starts building it up. He uses that to get all the way back up to 1-1. So they're tied at 1 life. Gothic's got this big Obelisk. Idol shows up for both players. It's a hit for both players. They both take it. They open up his Spectral Packs. There's an Ankh in there. Gothic sells everything. He sells the big Obelisk, takes the Ankh, Ankhs the Idol, double skip straight to PvP. Nito keeps the rest of her scoring jokers, doesn't Ankh the Idol, but does match the double skip. And that was the difference in this game. Gothic wins at the very last moment for this game 3. So that was a 3-0 for Gothic. Next one is Roffle versus Vagabond. We said that the Bear Fur game was the game of the week. I think, in my opinion, this is the set of the week. This is just a very well-played set by both players. Some good, interesting decisions, exciting moments. Probably my favorite set to watch from this week. Game 1, Anaglyph, Black, as usual. Early Deja Vu for both. There's an Eternal Bloodstone with the dice. Vagabond, he is able to find a photo deep into Ante 3, and so he's ahead of Photograph. Both of them find Sock. Vagabond, he's ahead in Econ, so he finds an Invis Joker that Roffle doesn't find. He sells his Photograph because he knows he's not going to rip the Invis on this photo. He wants it to hit either the Bloodstone or that Sock. Basically, the game goes down to 1-1. Vagabond, he has to rip that Invis. He rips it. It hits dice. So he doesn't... The advantage that he had was the Photograph. He sold that for the Invis, which was now his advantage. Invis did nothing because he sold the second dice, and now they're basically even. Roffle, he has like no econ. It's 1-1. He skips for a Mega Buffoon pack because he's like, I'm gonna get more value out of this Mega Buffoon than I will from actually playing the blind and making it into the shop. Doesn't find anything important. In that final shop that Roffle skipped, Vagabond finds both Blueprint and Brainstorm, and so he destroys that PvP. So Vagabond wins that first game. Second game, they go to Yellow Deck Gold Stake. There's an early Baron and an Idol. Both players pick up the Baron. Only Vagabond picks up the Idol. Roffle sticking to that Baron. Next ante, they both find Invis. Roffle rips it on the Baron. Vagabond rips it on the Idol. Unfortunately, the Idol does not hit in time. The Baron was enough consistent scoring for Roffle, and so Roffle takes game 2. Game 3, winner takes all. We went to Checkered Deck White Stake. Similarly, there's an early Dusk and an early Baron. Both players take both this time, because it's White Stake, none of them are Eternal. Idol shows up for both players. Vaga takes the lead early. He's up 3 lives to 2. Roffle double skips for the Idol hit. Vaga then dies to the small blind. He had a Justice he was holding. He was on the Dusk. He could have used it to lift the blind, but every single lucky hit on the 4 of a kind he played missed, so he dies. So now they're 2-2. Roffle wins that PvP because he double skipped. He's up 2-1. We're in this shop. Vagabond's on 1 life. He rolls all the way down because he's on 1 life. Roffle, saves some money for some interest. Vagabond barely makes it to a natural negative blueprint in the shop that Roffle was 1 reroll away from finding. Because Vagabond was on 1 life, he had rerolled all the way down, and he found this natural negative blueprint that Roffle did not see.
1 roll. That's insane.
Mm-hmm. And then Vagabond uses that to win the game, and he wins the set 2-1. Very exciting set. Would recommend watching that one if you have the time. Okay, what's next? We have C-Dubs versus Nandre. Any guess where game 1's going? You guessed it right. Anaglyph Black. Basically what happens is early in the game, there's a polychrome sacrificial dagger. Nandre picks it up, starts sacrificing the jokers into this dagger, and it doesn't work at all. And C-Dubs wins 4-0 with Chad and Glass. So pretty simple game 1 right there. Game 2, Nandre, he's taken it to Plasma. C-Dubs takes it to Gold. Nandre takes an Eternal Scary Face in the very first Buffoon pack, and then both of them take an Eternal Photograph later that same ante. C-Dubs, he makes more money than Nandre, and he finds a rental perishable Dusk that Nandre misses. So Nandre, he actually dies to a blind. So now C-Dubs was actually up 2-1 with 1 pip left of Dusk. So Dusk is on its last life. His opponent died to a blind, so now they're on 1 life. And he uses that very last hit of Dusk with the Photograph and the Glass and everything else to be able to take the final life. I'm not sure how it would have gone if Nandre hadn't died to the blind, but it was very fortunate for C-Dubs that he was able to use that Dusk to take the final life. Game 3 is on Ghost Deck Gold Stake. Nandre, he builds into this Oops All X-Molt. He gets a hologram and a baseball and a bunch of uncommon jokers, and C-Dubs just literally dies 0-4. Nandre builds a ton of Exmal and he just wins on that gold stake. C-Dubs didn't really find anything. He again took a Sixth Sense, didn't hit anything important. He got a Wraith, and it was kind of his last out. He was on 1 life. He rips the Wraith. It's a wee joker. Doesn't have time to scale it. And that's the game. So Nandre wins the game 3, 4-0. So it was a 2-1 win for C-Dubs.
We've got our next game, Dr. Spectred versus HC Justin. In the first game, the first pack, once again, always open that first buffoon pack unless you've got a strong reason not to. Justin does not open the first pack. Doc does, and there is a sock in it. With that sock and the bloodstone that showed up later, Doc is able to take the lead and win that game. In the second game, second one was a very close one. Doc didn't have a Chad for a very long time that Justin had because Justin held a riffraff longer. Doc went ahead and dropped it after he got some really good jokers, mail and rebate, and a couple other things out of it. And Justin actually sells the mail and rebate in order to keep getting riffraff value and ends up getting a Chad. But later on, Doc does end up finding the Chad. Actually, though, Justin could have won the PvP, one of the PvPs, I forget which one it was, to take the last life off of Doc if he had ordered his cards differently. But unfortunately, didn't realize the correct way to order them for the most score. I believe it was, he didn't put the glass first for the Chad or something like that. And Doc ended up taking that game. Game 3 was on Red Deck Gold Stake. So fairly early on, I think it was in the second ante, there was an Eternal Rental Certificate. Honestly, probably something I wouldn't have taken, but Doc takes the Eternal Rental Certificate and gets some blue seals from it, takes a commanding lead with the pair scaling from the blue seal, and that's just enough, and he ends up going up 4-1. Justin ends up losing the last life because he takes a Spectral Skip, which ends up giving him an Onk. He sells everything to Onk the Chad, but I think, as the commentators were saying, he didn't really realize the fact that, oh wait, this is a skip, not in the shop. I can't pick something else up to have the scoring to survive, and just dies because there's no glass in the deck or anything. Double Chad's just not enough. With Gold Stake, you just, you can't make a move like that in 1 life, unfortunately. Too high scaling, and just ends up losing that one, and Doc takes that set 3-0.
And then our final game for this week was Nemo versus Bean. I think we talked about it last week, but unfortunate first 2 games for Nemo being the past 2 winners of your Major League Balatro.
Yeah.
Game 1 was again Anaglyph Black Stake. Very interesting. There was an early sock, early Chad, both players pick it up, but Bean, he picks up an early business card that is eternal. It does let him get a lot of money, but it makes a Joker slot, locked in place for that business card. Bean uses that money to find a Bloodstone that Nemo doesn't, and he uses that to get Nemo down to 1 life. Nemo's down 1 life to 4, and then Dusk comes. Bean doesn't have enough Joker slots to pick up Dusk. Nemo does, because they didn't pick up that Eternal Business. Bean actually ends up selling his sock for that Dusk, so that if the idol doesn't hit a face card, he's still able to use that Dusk. Nemo is able to have both sock and Dusk, but Bean barely able to leverage those glass and other things to win this one with 3 lives left. Game 2, Ghost White, the classic. The biggest decision here for Bean was that he took an 8-ball and dice and parking. He used that to get Terror Generation, get some glass. The dice parking got a bunch of money. He finds an invis, and he wins the game with 3 lives left. Game 3, again on Ghost White. Both of them take Ancient Joker and Bloodstone and Dusk. Pretty early, basically you know what you're doing. Game's tied 2-2. Bean skips for Ancient Hearts, takes it up to 2-1. Loses the next one, is tied 1-1. Bean, again, double skips for the Hearts. And he takes Justice and a Cryptid into the final PvP to ensure the best hand. He has a red seal that isn't glass yet, and his opponent, Nemo, does not have any red seals. Bean's able to find his red seal, glass it up, cryptid it, and that was the difference because Nemo actually ended up skipping the exact same way for that same Ancient Joker hit. So both players with pretty much the exact same Jokers, the difference was the red seal, and that's what caused Bean to win with only 1 life left. That was a 3-0 for Bean. Very close game 3. And that was our games for this week, so we'll quickly go over the standings. Slightly more interesting than last week because there's 2 matches played for each of these players. I will go over the Onyx division. For the Onyx division, we have at the top Bean with 8 points currently. He has won both his matches 3-0, so he is #1 player in that division. Close behind is Feinberg and Vagabond, tied for second with 6 points. Gothic in 4th, and Roffle, C-Dubs, and Edsy tied for 5th.
Over here on the Bloodstone division, we've got Zeno and Doc up at both 8 points each. Both have not lost a single match yet. Rarran at number 3 with 6 points. And then it's a huge tie for the players that are right behind them at 4 points between Halion, Belanos, Fur, and myself.
Okay, and now we will go over the games that are coming up next week. Again, if you want to find out where these are being cast, where you can watch them, what time, check out the whole schedule. It's on MajorLeagueBalatro.com. And all of the times that we will be saying in this preview will be in EST. So on Monday, February 23rd, Vagabond versus Nandre at 8:30 p.m.
Then on Tuesday, the 24th, we've got Scooty and HC Justin at 12 p.m. noon. And overlapping without a bit, we've got Malf and Fur at 1 p.m. Later that day, at 5 p.m., we've got Dr. Spectre versus myself, Sisek.
On Wednesday, the 25th, we will have Roffle versus Bean at 3 p.m.
And then soon after, we've got Belanos Bear versus Rarran at 5 p.m.
On Thursday, the 26th, we have Nito versus Edzy at noon, and then Nemo versus Gothic at 2 p.m.
As well as Zeno versus Halion at 3 p.m.
And finally, on Friday the 27th, our last game of the week will be C-Dubs versus Feinberg at 8:30 p.m. Zach, are there any matches in particular that you are looking forward to?
I mean, I'm excited to play against Doc. I've interacted with Doc a bit, but I've never gotten a chance to play a game of multiplayer with Doc, and I am nervous, but very excited about that. Yeah, I mean, that's maybe it's silly to be most excited about my own game, but I've been looking forward to playing Doc for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to watch that. You're both very strong players, so I'm excited to see how that ends up going. Another one that I'm also excited to watch is Bean versus Roffle. Again, those are the two winners of the past 2 seasons of Major League Balatro. So very exciting match, both very strong players. I think that one will be a very good watch.
For sure, for sure.
Okay, that's all for this week. We will catch y'all next week. See ya.
See ya.